Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Wine, Women, and Words. And joining me tonight, of course, is Michelle.
Hello.
And our special guest this week is Christina, or did I say that right? Christine Henry?
Yep,
Christina Henry.
Yep, that's definitely me. Hi, guys.
Hi. It's such a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So now, before the show started, we're just going to dive right into this because we're having this great discussion, and I had to cut you guys off, and we're going to pick it back up so that everybody else can hear. Michelle and Christina were discussing Christina's books, and Michelle's reading The Girl in Red right now, and she's about 30 pages shy of it. And they were discussing why Christina has a tendency to do books with multiple parts. So now that you guys are all caught up, you two can go.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I was going to say was Michelle was saying that she was like, oh, we're close to the end, and I don't think every single thing is going to be wrapped up. I should warn you that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a sequel. But one of the things I do in my books, there's a few different reasons why Alice, Red Queen, Girl in Red, some of my other books, you know, people get this impression that they end quickly. And one of the reasons why is because a lot of them have fairy tale or stories that we think of like fairy tales, because Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan are not fairy tales, but they feel like it. Culturally, we have a kind of language around them that makes them feel like a fairy tale. And in these kinds of stories, the stories just end. I mean, in Little Red Riding Hood, the woodsman comes to the house and kills the wolf, and like it's over now. You know, the story just kind of it ends. And so one of the things I try to retain is like that fairy tale feeling, but also there's something that I like to call leaving imaginative space. So I like to leave space for the reader to fill in themselves. I think it's okay not to tie every knot and like, you know, loop every bow. I think it's a good thing for readers to kind of take the story themselves and they can imagine all those spaces that, you know, that they would fill in.
I think that goes back. Diana and I have had this debate many times about endings, and Diana likes the interpretive endings where we can determine what happens on our own and decide what happens. And I have questions at the end, and I like those questions answered. That doesn't mean that I won't like the ending. I already know that I will, because I've read your other books and they're amazing. And there was a small degree of fangirling happening before this episode started. But that's like one of our main differences in our reading styles is Diana loves the interpretive endings.
I do.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously like anything else, like any media, you know, it's like it's your preference. You know, I always say that readers, you know, 50% of like the experience of a book comes from the reader. The reader brings themselves to the book. So like, you know, your tastes, your experiences, the mood you're in when you read the book, all these things come to the book with you, and they impact the way that you view the story. And even like the age when you read a book can really affect how you feel about it. You know, if you think about a book that you loved when you were 15 and then you tried to read it again 10 years later and you were like, what? Like, I don't, you know, because you're a different person, right? You're literally a different person. So I like half of the book is the writer and half of the book is the reader.
I love that. I don't think we've ever vocalized that. Like, we always knew it, but I don't think we ever like put it into words in that way. So I was reading the blog post that you did on your website for the release of The Girl in Red. And you included a quote about the book that said, Christina Henry once again proves that retellings don't necessarily lack originality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that embodies your books perfectly, because we've heard the stories before, but never like the way that you approach them. So can you tell us a little bit about how you approach a retelling and what kind of what the process is when you decide what you're going to do?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things is that like doing a retelling isn't necessarily different from doing a so-called original story. Especially for me, because my process is basically start at the beginning and go until I get to the end. I don't really, I don't plan out my books. They just kind of happen. But one of the interesting things is that, you know, every writer is impacted by what's come before them. You know, I always say that we're playing like this generations long game of telephone, you know, where someone is told a story and someone else has heard it. And then when they tell a story again, it changes a little bit, right? Just like when you're playing telephone when you're a kid. And every story is like this. We have all these tropes, right? All this mythology, fairy tales, folk tales, every story that's come before us. And so every storyteller just takes the sort of sum total of their experiences and kind of mashes them into something new. And so I don't necessarily think of retellings as being any different, because every book that I write has been influenced by, again, sort of the sum total of my influences, loves, whatever, you know, things that I've read before. And yeah, I guess I just don't think of it as different per se.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned before, I haven't read Red Queen. That's the one that I haven't read yet. I don't know why, but it really blows my mind how you take Little Red Riding Hood at its barest form is a really simple story. It's about a girl walking through the woods, going to grandma's house, and that's it. But you have expanded it into this post-apocalyptic world where there's, you know, the virus that has wiped people out and we don't really know what's going on. But were there other paths, and pun was intended on that, that you meant that you were considering for Red's story, or was that always what you had in mind?
So the original idea that I had about the cough, and some other things that appear in the book, I had actually intended not Red's story in any way, just like the cough and something else that happens in the story that I'm not going to tell because it's like a thing that happens toward the end. I'd intended those two elements to go in another story, which I think I'm going to end up writing next year. And when I started thinking about this book, all I saw was a girl in a hood with an axe. I didn't have anything else. And a lot of my stories start that way. Like it's either a question or an image. So I saw this girl in a red hood with an axe, and I wanted to know why she was there and what she was doing. And so I started writing so I could find out. And that's kind of how my process works. For me, writing is a process of discovery. You know, if I write an outline, the story is no longer interesting to me because I know the end. I need to write it almost the way I would read it. So a lot of times when I'm writing a book, I'm as surprised by things as you are when you're reading it, because I didn't expect that to happen.
You go.
Oh, okay. I don't want to intrude on your fangirling time.
No, it's fine. I'll share. It's all right.
Okay. I want to respect your fangirl experience. That's why I've been quiet and letting you take the lead, Michelle. Now, before this, you wrote a series about Madeline Black, a Chicago-based agent of death. Mm-hmm. What initially drew you into doing retellings?
So again, it wasn't really a thing that I meant to do. I think if you listen to me talk about my career trajectory, it sounds super half-assed. Well, I didn't really plan this, and I kind of just ended up doing it.
I can totally relate.
Well, what had happened was I was writing the Blackwing series. And I started writing it when there was a huge urban fantasy boom. There was a zillion urban fantasy series out. Mm-hmm. And it just sort of, after a while, started to get crowded out in the market. And Penguin was like, yeah, I think we're done with this. And so then I was really at a crossroads because I had thought I was going to write 2 more Blackwings books. They're originally meant to be 9. So I got to 7, and then they were like, yeah, we're done with this series now. And my editor said, well, we still have two more books under contract. And nobody knows what the next big thing is going to be. So just write whatever you want. I was like, okay. So I've had this really weird kind of Alice story that's not really fully formed. And I was like, how about this? And she was like, sure, give it a try. I mean, it was really like we don't even know what's going to work. So just write something.
Oh, to have that kind of freedom. Be like, yeah, whatever you come up with, we'll go with it. Yeah. Like it. Yeah.
It was definitely, it was a weird time. Mm-hmm. Because I was still under contract and they needed 2 more books from me, but nobody kind of knew what direction the market's going to. When you write for a big publisher, they're always like, the market, what can we sell? But nobody really knew. So it was a chance for me to kind of start over. Mm-hmm. And I think my inclinations have always been towards darker books anyway. So although I loved writing the Blackwing series just because I also like writing humor. So my books the more recent books tend not to have a lot of that. But I wrote Alice and I sent it to my agent and I sent it to my editor. And I remember I was so nervous because it was not like what anything I'd written before. And I was like, oh my God, what if they hate it? I really put myself out there with this completely different thing. And I remember about a week and a half after I sent it, we were on vacation and I got an email from my agent and she was like, I love it. And I was like, die. Because I don't know what I was going to do if it was terrible.
You're like, score, save, phew.
So it was kind of an accidental thing. And then I wrote Alice and I did not intend to write another one. Mm-hmm. So Alice was just supposed to be Alice. And then it was popular right away. So my editor was like, well, you still have 1 more book under contract, so write a sequel. Mm-hmm. So that was how Red Queen happened. So see, it was all very accidental. It was and then Lost Boy came about because when my son was 5, he's 13 now. And he's super tired of me telling this story, by the way.
So you're going to tell it one more time.
When my son was 5, he went through this total obsession with Peter Pan phase. We watched the movie all the time, and he wanted me to read the book to him. And he dressed up as Peter Pan for Halloween, and he just loved Peter Pan. And so we were watching the movie for the 1 millionth time. And I said to myself, why does Captain Hook hate this kid so much? I mean, it's an irrational hatred, right? He's an adult. Shouldn't he be doing adult things? He's a pirate. He could be off pirating, but here he is on this island trying to kill this kid. And I needed to know why, so I wrote Lost Boy.
Well, I loved Lost Boy. Like, I remember I read Alice. I got it as a Christmas present from my husband, and because he goes, well, what do you want for Christmas? And I said, well, here is a list of books that I want, and you can buy any of these books from the list. And Alice was on the list, and I read Alice, and I think I texted Diana while I read Alice and said, we have to have this author on the show because I have to pick her brain. And then I read The Mermaid, and then I read The Lost Boy. And Lost Boy has been I haven't finished The Girl in Red yet, but Lost Boy has been my favorite because that's, as a writer, we're both writers as well. Diana writes historical fiction. I write what you do, or I'm trying to write what you do. And I'm working on my own kind of like, not retelling. It's like kind of like a what happens next type thing.
Yeah.
And
you're asking a question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just the way that you built Neverland, like you made it your own, and that's kind of what I've been struggling with to make you're taking a world that we've grown up with. We've grown up with this story. We know, the Mermaid Lagoon, and we know where the Indians are, but you made it your own while still being respectful of the world that we love so much. And how do you do that?
Well, like in the case of Lost Boy specifically, because that's, of all the kind of retellings I've done, that's the one that's sort of closest to the source material. I had this idea that it was almost like a prequel to Peter Pan, like you would read my book and then you'd read Peter Pan, and I felt that I had that license to kind of remake the world, because Barry gives the characters that license in the original novel. When Wendy, Michael, and John first come to the island, he talks about how the geography of the island sort of changes according to what they want and what they imagined, but the island is sort of what they make of it. So I had this idea that the island, because Peter is so closely tied to the island in my version of the book, the island is what Peter makes of it. It's what he wants it to be. So I felt that sort of the permission was already there in the original text, and I could do that. But I also, the whole geography of the island is, for me, everything starts with characters. Like, I care a lot more about characters than I do about plot. I know I'm bad. I like my whole thing is the plot is just there to hang the characters on, I'm much more interested in how like events impact the people in the books. And I wanted the island to be like a boy's paradise, just like wild boys, I saw, especially when my son was small, there's this thing that boys do where they're like, they almost like, they get into these like little gangs and like kind of like one little leader that they all follow, He's the one who decides what they're going to play and what they're going to do. And then they can be so like absurdly, like, it seems terrible from the outside. You're like, why are you guys being so mean to each other? They're so like rough. And then they can be so sweet and so tender. And I wanted all of that dichotomy, all of these complexities of boys to be reflected in their relationships, and also to be reflected in the geography of the island. That was a long way around to saying I just made it up as I went along.
But a very brilliant way of doing that. It sounded very intellectual, and
I'm really, really good at faking this. I'm really good at like sort of going about backwards, like, oh yeah, I really meant to do this.
Well, we're writers, so aren't we supposed to fake it because we make stuff up for a living?
So
It's like
all
our
I do
job.
is fake it all day.
Well, I mean, but you tell your stories very well, because I will say that I have not hated Peter Pan more than by the time I finished that book. Like, there was a series a few years ago called Once Upon a Time, and I watched that religiously, and they made Peter Pan just a horrible, horrible person in that show. And I hated him then too. But this, by the end of Lost Boy, I was like, oh my God, Peter is a terrible human being.
Well, the one thing I always knew about that book for sure was the last line.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I always knew it was going to that last line, because that was the sort of central question of the book that I had when I first started, was like, why does he hate Peter Pan, right? So I wanted people to get to that last line, and I wanted to feel like I'd earned it, you know.
You did.
So it was also like my little kind of homage to my favorite last line of all time, which is also a four-word last line, which is he loved Big Brother from 1984.
That's very, very good last line. Very, yeah. Love it.
I remember the first time I read that book, I was like, oh, gut punch. And so I wanted people to get to the end of Lost Boy and be like, oh, gut punch.
Yeah, you did that.
Like, these are my goals.
I'm preparing for another one, because, I mean, the other thing that you're danced around that you're not mentioning in The Girl in Red, I'm just about there. Like, I know something's coming, but I don't know what exactly it is. So I'm preparing for it. But one thing that I love about Red, as I'm reading it, is that we get to know her very slowly in the book. Like, she doesn't give her whole backstory right away. She doesn't share anything, and trust is huge for Red. She doesn't trust anyone, and I feel like even the reader has to kind of earn her trust to learn more about her. Was she that way with you, or did you know exactly who she was from when you were writing her?
I mean, there were certain things I knew about her from the start, that she's like the kind of person who thinks they're the smartest girl in the room, and probably she is, but you don't want to encourage that. And, but also I needed to structure the book the way that I did so that you could kind of see how she changes from who she is with her family to who she is at the end of the book. I mean, I got, like a lot of my characters, I got to know her as I was writing her, and I feel like like most people, she reveals herself in her relationships. So it was important for her not to always be alone.
Right.
Because I feel like you learn more about people by the way they treat other people. And by relationships, I don't necessarily mean it has to be close relationships. I mean, you have a relationship with the person that you encounter at the 7-Eleven, that there's something there, right? So every encounter she has in the book is supposed to illuminate something else about her. Because ultimately, the book is not about the crisis. That was the big thing that I knew for sure with that book. I did not want to write another Chosen One story. I did not want to write a story where like some young woman magically discovers the source of everything and fixes it. I wanted to write a story that was personal. So like if something huge happened, like right now, I would never find out like why it happened, right? I'd just be trying to survive. And that's what the book is really about. It's not about the bigger thing. The bigger thing is just the bones to hang the story on.
And that's interesting. There's one part when you were talking about, you know, you have relationships with everyone. There was one part where, and this isn't giving away a major plot point at all, but she's searching a gas station for food, and she sees that whoever ran the gas station likes the same pen that she likes.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to those relationships. Like what else could they have had in common? Like she'll never know because now they're probably dead.
Or in a camp or something. Right. But yeah, they're gone. So it's, you know, it's not just about, you know, like what happens after. It's also about like everything you lost from before. Yeah.
Well, I'm preparing for another gut punch. I feel like it's coming.
I just hope you don't send me an angry email when you're done. Like, I always get scared when people tell me they're still in the process of reading the books and they loved it so far, and I'm like, but you haven't gotten to the end yet.
No, what'll happen is Michelle will be like, oh my God, I didn't see that coming. I got this total gut punch. I cried for hours. Thank you. That was great. When are we going to do it again?
Right? Exactly. That's why I keep coming back.
See, the thing about us is that we're sadists. We love when authors just punish us with their stories. So you have no need to worry.
I was doing a book signing in the UK last year, and a woman came up to me with a copy of The Mermaid, and she had like all of these Post-it tabs inside of it, right?
That's Michelle.
But there were like a lot of them. There were like 30 or 40 of them. And
Michelle.
So I said, oh, what are all these tabs for? And she said, these are all the parts of the book that made me cry.
Oh.
And I was like, I am a terrible person.
I have so much respect for you right now. I do plan on getting one of those wine glasses that say "Tears of My Reader." Because it's when I feel like that's such a really great compliment from her that your book was able to elicit such an emotional response where she actually physically cried over the stuff that you wrote. That's so cool.
It is, but I felt a lot of remorse in that moment. I was like, I'm very, very sorry I've done this to you.
But would you like me to sign it for you?
Yeah, I know, right? And like take a picture with you and like all this stuff. I was like, I'll do anything.
Your future books, maybe you just have boxes of tissues on hand to hand out to people. Sign the boxes of tissues for them.
Yeah, I mean, I've cried myself a couple of times when I read my book, so I kind of know what's coming. So yeah, I cried for sure when I was writing Lost Boy.
That one, I was texting Diana going, if this little boy dies, like I swear to God, he better not die.
Like, we do have those moments where we're like, I swear to God, this character better not die, and then it's like, oh damn it, they died.
Well, I mean, Lost Boy is ruthless. You know,
yeah.
when my editor read it, she was like, "This is Peter Pan meets Lord of the Flies." I'm like,
Nice.
And then, so one very noticeable difference between the Little Red Riding Hood of yesterday and Red is that besides the axe and the minor obsession with horror movies and books that probably saved her life, is that she has her prosthetic leg. And I thought that was a really interesting character trait. I don't know how to just. I thought that was a really interesting twist to the story and to the character, Why did you decide to work that into Red's story?
So again, like, I'm like the world's most half-assed writer. She just was that way in my head. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I wanted, sort of deliberately put this in the story. When I saw her, she had, below the knee prosthesis. So I was like, that's what she's got. That's her. And for the book, it does add another layer of complexity because she can't just run away the way some people can, in a perilous situation, which is one of the reasons why she's so prickly and cautious, because she has different considerations than other people do. Yeah. I mean, it was really, it was just that there she was that way, in my head. It happens a lot that way.
You're so my kind of writer, because while I'm writing, we've interviewed a lot of writers, and a lot of times they have, ask questions, and they'll have this very well thought out, well, I wanted to include this in the character because I wanted to show this, and I'm like, oh my God, if I publish this book and I'm doing interviews and someone asks me, why did you have, why was she always wearing red? And for example,
right,
my answer would be, because that's just what I thought.
Right.
That's how it came into my mind. And I don't have any deep, like intentional things. It just happens. It just unfolds while I'm writing.
And believe me, when I'm on panels and I listen to all these other writers like talking about their real writing process, and I'm kind of like, I don't know why I'm here. I'm not really like a real writer.
You see, you say half-assed, I say really great imagination that you're able to work off of. So, I mean, really, it's a win-win kind of situation.
Well, I mean, I think what it is really is that a lot of stuff just, obviously, it just sort of happens in the back of my head. Like, the back of my head is kind of working it without me sort of bringing it to the fore and deliberately thinking about the story. Like, oh, this thing needs to happen next, and that thing needs to happen next. Like, I'm a long distance runner, and a lot of times I run and I don't like think about anything. And I feel like that's like, like my brain is in the background just processing, the sort of meditative nature of running, where you're just kind of like going along, and I'm not thinking about the story. But then a lot of times I come home and find that things have sort of bubbled up. I think that one of the most important things you can do as a writer is to give yourself space to kind of think. Sometimes I just walk around the house with my iPod on, just listening to music. My husband will be like, what are you doing? I'm like, nothing. Just, just letting it, whatever, percolate. You need to give yourself imaginative space to do things. It can't always be like, I have to put words on the page. I have to be productive, because part of being productive is just sort of giving yourself breathing room.
I love that you say that. So I've heard some other authors, because the standard advice that you get when you're writing is you've got to write every day. You've got to write, X number a page a day or X number of words a day. And sometimes those words just don't come.
Yeah.
And so it's like what you say. And Diana Gabaldon had said as well, I'm sorry, hold on. I'm sorry, my children, aka my dogs, are acting up right now. So they're fighting off in the distance here. Anyway, so like Diana Gabaldon has said that even if you're watching TV, or your mind needs to, you feel like you need to take a break from writing, your mind's still working while you're doing these other things. And one of the things I like to think about is, when you're working a 9 to 5, your standard 9 to 5, you need time off. You can't be doing that job 7 days a week. You still need those 2 days off a week to do, other things. And as authors, we don't necessarily give ourselves that same kind of forgiveness, that ability to take that break, and we forget how important that is.
Yeah, I mean, there's value to saying like you should write such and such amount every day, because one of the things that, you know, first time writers think is like they have to wait for like the muse to come down and land on their shoulder. And like a lot of writing is work. Like sometimes you just have to sit down and do it, even when you don't necessarily feel like doing it, you know. But I'm also a big believer in, you know, giving yourself time. Like, so maybe you write 3 days a week, and then, you know, the other 4 days you do something else. Or if you're the kind of person who starts the story and needs to stay in the story, then you write every day, but maybe you don't write as much. You know, maybe you write a page. You know, it's not invaluable to sit. I'm sorry, I don't mean invaluable. It's not valuable. The double negative there. And I'm a writer. to say that, you know, I sat down and all I wrote was a paragraph. You wrote a paragraph. Go do something else. You know, I mean, it doesn't always, but sometimes I'll write that paragraph and it doesn't seem like it's really going, but just kind of keep at it, and then it clicks. So sometimes there's value in pushing through, and sometimes there's value in taking space. It's like you kind of have to work out for yourself what makes you comfortable. But I think if you sit around waiting for inspiration, you'll never do the work. You know, so there's a balance.
Yeah, it's so true. Because I mean, and you know, no matter what, at the end of the day, like when you finish the book, there's going to be those hard days where it's going to be a struggle to get every word on the page, and there's going to be those days where it just flows.
Right.
If you go through an edit, you can't tell which ones are which. You really can't. I can say this from experience now.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah, you don't know, you can't tell, and it's like you just don't remember. So it's just push through as much as you can, and if you need to take a break, you stop and take a break.
Right. But people do, like I said, people do sort of give that standard advice so that people who want to write will develop the habit of writing. Yeah, it's just like starting a new exercise routine or any other thing you want to do. You know, you have to develop a habit of it. And I think that once you can develop that habit, then you can kind of work out for yourself what the best schedule for you is.
I feel a lot better about my writing routine because I used to be very rigid and 1,000 words a day, but I'm on third draft where I got to a point very, very close to the end, but I got to a point and I was like, I've boxed myself into a wall and I don't know where I'm going. So I'm just going to start from the beginning. And I brainstormed and changed a few things, but I've been very slow, like 600 words a day, maybe a few days a week. But I guess that's just what my process is right now.
Right. That's just where you're at. I have a question for you though. Do you only write on the word processor, or do you ever write by hand?
A long time ago, I used to only write by hand. Then I wrote exclusively on a laptop, and now this draft, I'm writing it out longhand.
So I do a lot of my drafts in a notebook, and there's something about the deliberative nature of writing by hand.
Yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah, it really, I think first of all, it takes off some of the pressure because you're not looking at your computer screen being like, I've only done 150 words. And also because you pause naturally when you're writing. So it's kind of like you can pause and give yourself a little mini breather before you go on to the next thing. So sometimes I really recommend, if you're stuck, to try writing it out by hand, because
I love writing it out by hand. That's one of the things I did with my book for the first draft, where worked a full-time job, and so on my lunch breaks and stuff, I would write out by hand in notebooks, and then I'd come home and I transcribed it into the computer, and sometimes I would add on to that, and You know, it helped really push me forward. And then, you know, with writing the second book, I'm doing a very similar thing. And there's something really therapeutic to it. To, like you said, you see those lines on the page, you're not staring at a blank screen. And I think in some ways you also have this mental change where you're thinking differently. I think when you're writing out by hand versus when you're typing.
Well, you are actually, it activates a different part of your brain. It like literally does. So yeah, you're right. But also, it's funny that you say, like, you know, you're at your job and you were writing by hand. So one of the reasons why I started writing by hand is because I wrote my first book when my son was 2, and I was trying to like write as much as I could, like while he was napping, basically. And then but he would wake up, so I would take him to the park, and he was like the kind of kid where if there was a sandbox, he would stay there for like 5 hours.
Awesome.
You know? So I would just bring him and like drop him in the sandbox and sit on a bench and like write out my book by hand. And that feeling when you bring it home and you put it into the Word document is so satisfying. You're like, I just wrote a zillion words. And you edit it as you go along. So it makes your first draft cleaner, I think. Because you are kind of like mentally, at least I do, I mentally make changes as I'm like putting stuff in. So
same here. And sometimes it's nice, even when you know, the second book I still have the day job, so I'm still doing that, but sometimes it's nice to, you know, you get up from where your normal spots are with your laptop, whether it's at a desk or in bed or at on the couch, and like get up and you go to a cafe with your notebook and write out the words. You go to a different environment sometimes too.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of my books have been written on playgrounds, like a lot of them. Even now, because like I homeschool my son, so sometimes I'll take him out. We'll like go downtown. We live in Chicago. Like I'll take him down to Maggie Daly Park, which is a big park downtown, and he'll just like run around, and I'll sit and like try to do some writing.
Love it.
I am actually in North Chicago, so I'm about an hour north. And I know that I just saw on your website that you're having your book release party this Sunday.
Yes.
Downtown. Now, should I have had to register for that a long time ago?
No. I'm totally not that popular. You can just show up.
Okay.
It's on Elston. It's like it's north side of Chicago. Yeah.
Okay. So. I don't know Chicago that well, but I have my GPS.
Yeah.
So
I'm not 100% sure like what parking situation is. We probably have to do street parking, but I think that like I hate to drive, so it's a very good thing that I live in a city that has a good public transportation system. So I'll be coming there by bus in super glamorous author fashion.
It's the only way to arrive.
That's right.
I definitely want to come and check it out and say hi in person.
Yes, please come. It'll be awesome. And it's by the way, it's BYOB. So
bring your own beer.
Maybe I could take the train.
Yeah, so you can bring your own drinks. Yeah, it's a nice bookstore.
I think you should, Michelle. I think you should take the train in and grab a bottle of wine and.
Well, the first time I took the train downtown, one of my best girlfriends from Arizona had come out to go to an author signing event, and just really, I know we're way over, and I'll let you go, I promise. Before we went, we were super excited to see her and meet her. We love her books, and we forgot our words completely when we went. Like we were, you know, most people were introducing themselves like, "Hi, I'm Michelle, huge fan, really nice to meet you." We just went up and like stood next to her and smiled and walked away. That's
you know, I've totally done the same thing. Like to other authors that admire, like I kind of did that when I met Charlaine Harris. I was like, duh, duh, duh. I was like, I was on a panel with her, and I was like just overwhelmed to be sitting next to her in that environment. I was like, what am I doing on a panel with Charlaine Harris? And definitely I met several years ago, I met Bruce Campbell, who, I don't know how many horror movies you guys watch, but
love Bruce. He is like the king. I mean, seriously, his what was it? The Army of Darkness.
Yeah, I love him in Army of
Darkness. It's a classic. It's one of the great classics. If you have not watched it yet, that is your homework for this weekend.
So about it's got to be like 17 or 18 years ago now. He was doing a showing of Army of Darkness. He was presenting a showing of Army of Darkness in Decatur, Illinois, which is literally in the middle of a bunch of soybean fields. Like if you drive south in Illinois, there's just a lot of soybean fields.
Wow.
And it was supposedly at like the most haunted movie theater in the state or something. So it was like middle of nowhere.
Uh-huh.
And my husband and I drove down there so we could see Bruce show this movie at the most haunted movie theater in Illinois. And then afterwards we met him, and I went up to talk to him, and he goes, "Hey, baby." And I was like, oh, I can't even talk now. I was just like, uh-huh. I was like, will you sign my book? Like, kind of, I don't think I even said anything else. They took a picture, and then like I walked away just feeling very dazed. I was like, Bruce Campbell just called me baby, and I can't talk anymore.
I mean, he called you baby. That's wonderful. That's, so epic.
It was and it was totally in his Ash voice too. I was like, I'm dead.
Oh my God. I would be right there with you if he used the Ash voice. Oh,
I was dead. I was like, I don't know why I even came, because I'm dead now.
That is the best. That is the best fangirl story. I met John Barrowman once. I recognize him from like Torchwood and Doctor Who. And I met him once, and I just giggled the whole time.
Yeah.
And I had just this
I think some of these actors have to be used to it, right? Like people come up to them and like I can't even stand in your aura.
What was it? Matt Smith was he told a great story once, as Doctor Who fan. Woohoo! He was going home, and all of a sudden he heard a noise, and he looked up, and there's a girl, like a teenage girl, in his tree, reading a book, just reading a book in his tree. And he was like, "Hello," and she was like, "Oh, hi, you're the doctor, aren't you?" And he's like, "Yeah." She's like, "That's cool," and went back to reading her book.
Like she just wanted to be near, like in his vicinity.
Yeah, pretty much.
So weird.
Well, I've never been that weird. I have forgotten words completely. And
on the show, we've done that.
I text my girlfriend right before the show. I was like, "Oh my God, I'm so excited right now." And she goes, "Don't forget your words."
Oh, well, I'm nowhere near as intimidating as like Bruce Campbell.
Well, so if I like geek out a little bit on Sunday, just like kind of help me out a little bit.
I will, but you totally don't have to, because you're going to meet me and you're going to be like, who is this like tiny person? If I have one glass of wine, I'll be drunk. So,
Oh, so we'll be friends. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
And we actually ended up talking the full hour. So
I know. I just looked at the clock. I was like, "Oh, hey, our 30-minute interview went a little long."
But that's okay. This is great. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're actually going to be back on Saturday. We're going to have a brunch episode.
Oh, super fun.
Yes, and we're going to. I don't have the book with me, so I forget the author's name. But the book is called 1 Minute Later, and we'll be interviewing her. She's in England, so that's why we have a Saturday episode. So we're super excited about that.
Also why it's brunch, right? Because it's dinner time for her. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Christina, so much for joining us. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.